Is the entire world around us just one big computer simulation? Are we really living in the Matrix? Let's find out. Welcome back to the Least Professional channel on YouTube. How's everybody doing today? So this video was inspired by a comment from Wooly Bully on my Do We Really Know Anything video. I've always been intrigued by the idea that the whole universe could be a simulation, like one big game of The Sims. I like to imagine someone sitting there looking at the screen, waiting for me to get done with whatever I'm doing. Although if they were really like me playing The Sims, I would have died in a fire making mac and cheese the first time. So formally, this idea is known as the simulation hypothesis, and it's been around in one way or another for a really long time. So we can trace one version all the way back to the Aztecs, who carried a belief that the whole world was a painting or a book written by Teotl, one of their pantheon of gods. Other versions can be found in Mayan culture, ancient Greek philosophy, and even in ancient China. The popularized modern version is credited to a Swedish-born philosopher named Nick Bostrom, who came up with a trilemma he called the simulation argument in 2003. Breaking it down simply, the trilemma Nick came up with says that there is a likelihood that one or more civilizations exist in the universe that may have reached a stage in their technology that allows them to simulate their history, and that of those civilizations, at least one of them decided to actually simulate the universe. And because of that, there would be civilizations that do live in a simulation without knowing that they live in one. So it would be understandable if your head was spinning right now trying to keep up with all of that. There's a lot of debate on this subject for several reasons, but let's dive into the arguments and look at them from a logical perspective. So the first point is basically saying that in our known universe, there's a lot of life out there. Some of that life has developed similar to humanity here on Earth, with technology and civilization. The main idea here is that some of those civilizations may be more advanced than we are, to the point where they have enough compute power to simulate the entire universe, just to see how things worked early on, as well as how life developed on their planet and maybe in other places around the universe. Now, to even be able to simulate the universe in the way that they want to means several things, like knowing the initial state of the universe, how things were before the Big Bang, placement of atoms and molecules. There's a lot to account for. Some of this dives into the concept of free will and whether or not we have that, but that's another video. So, let's say that this hypothetical civilization not only has the ability to simulate the entire universe, but the knowledge that they would need to do so. The second point in the hypothesis concerns whether or not they would want to simulate the universe. Maybe they just don't care enough about their history to simulate it and see firsthand what happened. Maybe they do care, but they aren't convinced they could even fully trust such a simulation. There are a plethora of reasons why they might choose to create a simulation of the universe, and just as many as to why they would choose not to. Because we only have our own experiences to fall back on, the reason that they would choose to or choose not to could be something that we haven't even thought of. Okay, so we'll say that the civilization not only has the technology, but also has the knowledge and the desire to simulate the universe. The last point of this hypothesis says that because of the first 2 points, chances are close to 100% that we're living in a simulation. So breaking this down, the idea is easier to explain with small numbers. So let's say that our hypothetical real universe has 100 people in it. The smaller the number, the easier it is to explain it. And there are 5 civilizations, and each one has 20 people in it. If one of those civilizations simulates the universe, there would be one simulation with 100 people and one real universe with 100 people. That would mean that any one person picked at random has a 50-50 chance of being in the simulation. If 2 of the civilizations create separate simulations, that means there are 100 people in the real universe and 200 people in the simulations, meaning there's a 66% chance that any one person is living in a simulation rather than the real universe. So let's say that you had a list of all 300 people in our example. If you picked a random person off of that list, the chances that they live in a simulation would be higher than the chances that they lived in the real universe. The more simulations you have, the higher the chances that the person you picked from the list lives in a simulation. The more simulations you have, the bigger the difference and more likely it is that the random person lives in a simulation rather than the real universe. So we've established the hypothesis and how it works. But what does this mean for us and whether or not we live in a simulation? So the problem with this hypothesis is that it's not falsifiable. That means that there is no way to disprove it, and in turn there's no way to test and prove it. As far as we can tell, with every method presently available, we live in a physical universe. The simulation hypothesis is a fun thought experiment, but that's all it is as of right now. If it were true that we were living in a simulation, the very next question would have to be, is our simulation just a sim of another sim? How far does it go? We could run through an infinite number of simulations and have no way to know where the real universe is in the chain of simulations. So another possibility raised by Bostrom in his paper on the subject is that the simulation that we live in could be an experiment rather than a historical recreation of events. This eliminates the need to know the initial state of the universe and drastically reduces the amount of processing power required to run the simulation. He mentions in the paper that things on the microscopic level could be rendered only when needed, like when they were being observed, and so would require less compute cycles to maintain. I will link the entire paper down below just in case you want to go and read it for yourself. It's actually a really interesting read. He makes some really fun points in there, so I would definitely recommend, don't just take my word for it, but go check it out and read the paper for yourself. So when it comes down to it, whether we are in a simulation or not, the limitations that we have on us are real to us. From every piece of hard evidence that we have, we live in a physical universe and not in a simulation. Does that mean that we shouldn't explore those topics? No. Many of the things that we know today started as fringe hypotheses that were laughed at. But we should break that trend. That doesn't mean that we need to believe every hypothesis that's tossed out, but it does mean that we should take them at face value and see if there's anything to back them up. We also need to watch ourselves when it comes to accepting these hypotheses before they've been proven. Sometimes we can find ourselves partial to an outcome, and we latch onto the idea and become blind to anything that's wrong with it. That's part of being a human. It's okay to want something to be true, but we need to keep an eye on how our personal desires may cloud the evidence, or lack thereof, for a subject. So to have a little bit of fun with this video, I'll leave you with an example of my own to demonstrate why we should lean more on what we can observe and test than things that primarily lean on philosophy. So in this example, there's a powerful being that lives on a world much like our own. One day, that being fell into a deep sleep. No one could figure out what caused this sleep, but it couldn't be awoken. While sleeping, it began to dream. The dream consisted of two beings. One being was light and one was dark. The light being created a world full of life, where fully sentient beings roamed and interacted with each other in what they thought was a real world. The dark being created chaos within that world, bringing death and destruction and balance out of life and creation. The beings within that world would often dream of their own worlds, creating and destroying worlds and entire universes each night when they slept. That world is our world. We are the creation of a being that is dreaming, and if it ever wakes up, will cease to exist. We have no way of distinguishing between the reality we experience and the reality of the being that dreamed us into existence. So this example was one that I completely made up. I did base it on lore from the Elder Scrolls games, so if you ever played those games, you're familiar with that. That's something I based the lore on there. But the reason that I made that up was to make a point. Anytime that we're looking at something from a scientific perspective, any hypothesis is put out there, whether it's where the universe began or where life began, or even the smaller things, any hypothesis that we're looking at from a scientific perspective, we have to take that hypothesis and it needs to go through the rigorous standards of the scientific method. It's okay to believe things whether they're true or not, because you can't help what you believe. You don't have any control over what you believe. You can't choose to believe something. So if you believe something and it turns out that there's things against that, or it turns out that it's not true, it's okay to say, you know what, I was wrong about this. And maybe not even completely wrong about it. With the simulation theory, we might someday find out that that we actually are in a simulation. Maybe we'll find some way to prove it, or something will happen. That is perfectly possible that it could happen. But until that happens, it's just a hypothesis. And when something is a hypothesis, you can't treat it as if it's real. You have to understand that when it's a hypothesis, it's not proven, it's not something that we know 100% for sure. And like I've mentioned in previous videos, while we can never be 100% certain on anything, there is a degree of certainty in there. And when you look at something like the simulation hypothesis, you might say with a 10% degree of certainty or 20% degree of certainty, as opposed to something like gravity, where we can say with a 99% degree of certainty because of all the tests that we've run, and it's now a law and it's a theory, the gravitational theory and laws of gravity and all that kind of stuff. We've done enough tests on that stuff that we can say with a higher degree of certainty. So it's not saying, no, this absolutely isn't the case. And there'll be other videos that I've got coming up soon that are going to be talking about things like last Thursdayism, for instance. That's going to be a good video that's coming up, where the idea is the universe was created last Thursday and you can't prove otherwise. And when you start to really dig into it, you really can't. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the simulation theory. They could have just turned on the simulation last Thursday and you wouldn't know any different because you were planted with all of the memories from your entire life. So those are some of the philosophical things that I'm going to be getting into that can really blow your mind when you start to really think in depth about them, but you also can't take them as gospel. You can't take them as truth and say, yes, this is absolutely true, because we don't have any evidence, and most of them aren't falsifiable when it comes to scientific standards. And scientific standards, if we're going to live our day-to-day lives, and it helps you make good decisions in your day-to-day life. You know, realizing how things actually work in the real world can help you to make positive decisions or better decisions when you're making choices on different things to do, so that you don't wind up hurt or killed or losing money or any number of negative things that can happen. You can eliminate some of those negative consequences, or at least minimize the risk of them, by using these methods to come to conclusions. So with all that being said, and I kind of went off script there for the last little bit, but I do want to take a minute to thank Wooly Bully again for the suggestion. It was an awesome suggestion. I love these kind of topics. If you've got a suggestion of something you'd like to see me talk about, drop it down in the comments below. I love to see those. I love interacting with you guys in the comments. Like I've said before, that's the entire purpose. Like that's what makes this channel so much fun for me, is interacting with you guys back and forth and having that conversation, whether it's in the comments section down below or over in Discord. A couple of people have joined the Discord, Wooly Bully being one of them, and that's an easy way to reach me. I love chatting with people in there and getting conversations going. Whenever you have time, I'm usually pretty free, even when I'm working, because I work from home, so I get to have my computer up and all that kind of stuff, so I can chat usually, unless I'm busy. If I'm busy with work comes first. But if things are slow or on the weekends, I'm free to chat as well. So keep that in mind. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching. I'll pop a video up right over here to go check that one out if you want to see more. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate that. I love every single person that's subscribed so far. You guys are all awesome. And I forgot to tell you, hit the thumbs up button. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up button. But talk to you later. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.